Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the finale of March of the Apes and episode 39 of Super Kaiju Binge. Hopefully, this is a little bit better. I'm sitting on a much lower chair than I have been in previous videos. I'm actually sitting on a cooler, but it allows me to sit lower so you guys aren't looking at me like this almost. But I like how this looks. Today, my fellow viewers, I will be going back to a truly special movie for myself. Oddly, this combined with my review of King Kong 05 back in 2017, this to date is my most viewed video, viewed video on my entire channel, nearing 10,000 views. I don't think it's changed since the last time I checked, but yeah, my dual review of this movie and King Kong '05 is my most viewed video. Well, still, um, oh well. Today, my fellow viewers, I will be concluding March of the Apes with a re-review of 2017's Kong Skull Island. Strap yourselves in, people. I have a lot to say about this movie. Kong Skull Island, of course, was released July. No, not July. March 10th. Oh, I'm pretty close. March 10th, 2017. It is the 11th film in the King Kong franchise, and it serves as the second film in Legendary Pictures' Monsterverse. It serves as a prequel to Godzilla 2014 and is the earliest depiction of the events in Legendary's Monsterverse. Oh boy, I got a lot to say. Kong Skull Island, I of course did learn about as soon as it was announced that it was being made due to the success of Godzilla 2014. And I was, of course, excited and very anxious to see this in theaters. I remembered, of course, seeing King Kong '05 in theaters, and I was really excited and determined to see another King Kong movie in theaters. So, not March 10th, but around March 20th, I believe, me and my friend Emery, whom I haven't seen since 2017 or early 2018. I can't quite remember. He and I walked half a damn mile in pouring ass rain to go see this movie in theaters. We were fucking soaking wet by the time we got to the theater, but we were so determined to see this because he and I both, of course, loved Godzilla 2014 in theaters. So we were just like, gimme, I want it. So we got to the theater. We got some looks from the theater staff seeing us be literally just dripping wet because it was pouring ass rain. But they asked us, are you going to catch pneumonia? And we were just like, we don't care. We want to see this damn movie. So, yeah, we bought our tickets and we eagerly rushed into the theater. We sat down and we watched Kong Skull Island. Now, I don't know about him, but I was fucking blown away by this movie. The entire time, like this was the first time in a long while, because 2017 was kind of a another breaking of movie theater drought period for myself. Not long before this, me and that same friend saw the 2017 Chips movie in theaters. And I hadn't seen a movie in theaters, I think, since Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2. So 2017 was another, period where I was just seeing movie after movie after movie. And 2017 as well, I think I like to consider it to be the beginning of what I call the Hollywood Renaissance, because the years of 2017 2015 had a lot of this too. 2015 was kind of a prelude to this Renaissance era because in 2015 we had Jurassic World, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, um, Terminator Genesis, and Tremors 5. 2016 was kind of a hit or miss year. There was Batman versus Superman and Deadpool, but 2017 really was the beginning of what I like to call the Hollywood Renaissance. It's like my favorite period of cinema, or at least some of my favorite years in cinema, because in 2017 we had Kong Skull Island, we had Wonder Woman, Logan, Thor Ragnarok, what else? That's all I can think of off the top of my head. That's four big heavy hitters, like some of my favorite films of 2017. Then in 2018, we would have. Hold on. Okay. We would have. No, not Shazam. Aquaman, Venom, Avengers Infinity War, Rampage, The Meg, The Predator. Really good movies in that year. And then, of course, we would have the giant slew and what I call the peak of 21st century cinema, at least thus far, with 2019 and having a gigantic slew of phenomenal fucking movies. Um, Godzilla King of the Monsters, even though I don't like this movie, Avengers Endgame, um, Happy Death Day to You, um, Doctor Sleep, It Chapter 2, the Child's Play remake, and then the 2020s have been pretty hit or miss thus far. But I would definitely probably say, even though it's got some competition with Logan, Kong Skull Island, hands down, is my favorite film of 2017. And I've made this no secret. Kong Skull Island is my favorite King Kong film. I've literally done 3 total ranking videos with Ryan, ranking all the Kong films, and every single time, number 1 was Kong Skull Island. And even though, as much as I adore this movie instantly became a favorite. I left the theater a very, very happy Kong fan. I was like talking about this movie for weeks afterwards, and I eagerly bought it on DVD as soon as it came out. As much as I love this film, I've only watched it maybe about 10 times since 2017, but every single time I watch it, I like it more and more and more. Um, and thankfully, a majority of the kaiju fan base generally does like this movie quite a bit. Uh, Kong Skull Island was released to generally positive reviews from critics, with praise for its visual effects, action sequences, and performances, particularly from Jackson and Riley. This movie was also a box office success, grossing $566 million against a $185 million budget. I think this is the most financially successful um, installment in the MonsterVerse. I think it's either this or Godzilla versus Kong. I'm not sure, but I'll get to that a little later. The film also received a Best Visual Effects nomination at the 90th Academy Awards. So this movie definitely did catch a lot of people's eye, which is greatly appreciated. um, that being said, I have surprisingly encountered a few individuals that don't much care for this movie. One of which in particular, which still gets under my skin. I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to start any bullshit drama. But I've heard this individual say that Kong Skull Island is the absolute worst King Kong movie made in the entire Kong franchise. But then would later go on to be hardcore Team Kong with Godzilla versus Kong. and like the movie because of Kong. Okay. But yeah, with all that being said, I love the living shit out of Kong Skull Island. This is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. The director of which, Jordan Vogue Roberts, I've never seen any other movie that he's done, but you can definitely tell that this guy is a hardcore monster movie fan. One criticism for some reason that I've seen uh thrown at this movie is that it's just an entertaining monster movie and nothing more. To me, I ask, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with just watching a damn good entertaining monster movie? Oh, Horror Metal is here. Yo. Um this movie knows exactly what it's trying to be. In a similar vein as Rampage, but I think this movie is a little deeper than Rampage. This movie knows what it's trying to be. It's trying to be a big budget, lavish, kick ass giant monster movie. And there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. This movie is a fun, entertaining ass romp. So, Kong Skull Island is set in 1973. A team of scientists and Vietnam War soldiers travel to the uncharted Skull Island and meet Kong, a gigantic ape who is the last of his species, closely followed by other terrifying creatures. The plot of which involves in 1944, two World War II fighter pilots, American pilot Hank Marlowe and Japanese pilot Gunpei Ikari, parachute onto an island in the South Pacific after a dogfight and engage in close combat until the fight is interrupted by a giant ape. In 1973, 29 years later, yeah, Bill Randa, played by John Goodman, head of the U.S. government organization Monarch, plans a search for primeval creatures on the recently discovered Skull Island. He recruits a U.S. Army unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Preston Packard, played by fucking Samuel Jackson. Tracker and former British Special Air Service Captain James Conrad, played by Tom Hiddleston. For some reason, in theaters, I could not recognize Tom Hiddleston. He was lacking the green Loki costume and the long black hair. But yeah, my friend Emery told me, "How do you not know who that is?" When I asked him, "Who the hell was Conrad?" He was like, "That's Loki." Duh. An anti-war photographer, Mason Weaver, played by Brie Larson. Arriving at Skull Island, Packard's men begin dropping seismic explosives, and the word has been spoken, developed by Randa's seismologist Houston Brooks to map out the island and prove Brooks' hollow earth theory. The unit is then attacked by the giant ape, scattering the survivors across the island. Two groups form between the survivors, one with Conrad, Weaver, Neves, the researchers, and one of the soldiers, the other with Randa and the rest. Packard searches for the transport helicopter piloted by Major Jack Chapman, intending to use the weapons on board to kill the ape. Conrad's group encounters the local Iwi natives and an older Marlowe, played by John C. Reilly. God damn, this movie has half of an MCU cast in it. You got Tom Hiddleston as Loki, Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, John C. Reilly from Guardians of the Galaxy, and Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury in this film. Cool. Marlowe tells the group the giant ape named Kong protects the island from predators, including a race of subterranean reptilian creatures he dubs skull crawlers, which were awakened from the bombing and responsible for killing Kong's entire species, leaving him the last of his kind. The Iwi believe when Kong dies, a giant skull crawler will awaken and ravage the island. Marlowe reveals he and Ikari had become friends during their time on the island, but Ikari was killed by a skull crawler some time ago. As Chapman is ambushed and devoured by a skull crawler, Conrad's group helps Marlowe finish a boat made from parts of Marlowe and Ikari's downed planes. They ride down the river where Neves is torn apart by carnivorous birds. No, Trev, those were not leaf wings. And secure communication with Packard's group. When they regroup with Packard, he insists on searching for Chapman. Marlowe leads them through a mass grave of dinosaurs and Kong's parents. Hold on one second. I'm going to grab something. I think this is it. Yep, that's it. The backstory of which detailed in the sequel comic Skull Island: The Birth of Kong. Hey Ryan, I got him. Yeah, okay, here we go. The skull crawler that killed Chapman attacks them, killing Randa and others before Weaver triggers a flammable gas explosion that kills it. Learning of Chapman's death, Packard reveals his plan to kill Kong and avenge his fallen men. Marlowe and Brooks attempt to explain that killing Kong would lead to these skull crawlers running rampant, but Packard refuses to listen. The groups part ways, with Packard's group retrieving the weapons from Chapman's chopper and laying a trap for Kong at a nearby lake, while the non-military personnel head back to the boat. Conrad and Weaver meet Kong up close and, seeing his true peaceful nature, resolve to save him. Packard's group lures Kong with the remaining seismic charges and incapacitates him with ignited napalm. Conrad, Weaver, and Marlowe arrive, and after a standoff, persuade the other soldiers to spare Kong, but Packard refuses to yield. As the others retreat, the giant skull crawler emerges from the lake. That's the big one. And Kong crushes Packard. Die, you mother. Boom! The skull crawler fights and overpowers Kong, but in the end, the ape is victorious with the human's help. The survivors reach the rendezvous point and leave the island as Kong stoically watches. In a pre-end credit scene, Marlowe reunites with his wife and meets his son for the first time. In a post-credit scene, Monarch detains and recruits Conrad and Weaver, who are informed by San Lin and Brooks that Kong is not the only Monster King, and show archive footage of cave paintings depicting Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah. The final image shows Godzilla and Ghidorah in battle, thus ending the movie, technically leading into Godzilla King of the Monsters. But yeah, so how about this plot? Well, for anybody that criticized King Kong '05 for being too similar to the original movie, it is, but I don't think that's a problem. You cannot say that this movie is too similar to its predecessor. This, in my opinion, is how a proper reboot should go about doing its thing. While this is not connected to any previous Kong movies whatsoever, of course, this does its own thing. It introduces a new type of Kong and does a whole bunch of new things for the King Kong franchise. It does have a couple Easter eggs and references to its predecessors, but this truly is its own new thing. However, similar to Terminator Genesis, Jurassic World, and especially Tremors 5, Kong Skull Island does a great job of introducing new things to the franchise, but still feeling familiar and still feeling like a King Kong film. And I love it. This movie does a whole bunch of new things for the Kong franchise because I'm not going to deny going through the rest of the Kong movies 33, Son of Kong, King Kong versus Godzilla, King Kong Escapes. Um, Kong 76, King Kong Lives, and then King Kong '05, I generally do tend to stick more towards the ones that do different things. That's why, I like King Kong versus Godzilla more than I used to. I love King Kong Escapes. I do like King Kong '05, and of course, I love this movie. And I like Godzilla versus Kong. All of those do different things and new things with the Kong character. Every other movie in the franchise just does the basic King Kong formula, and that gets old after a while. But with this movie, it introduces so much new shit to the King Kong franchise. It introduces an entirely different, brand new, badass version of Kong himself. That, you know what? Anything else that the Kong franchise has done, it's just not as good as this movie, in my opinion. This is King Kong at its very best. Sue me. Alrighty, so with all that being said, uh, I have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, 12 pros for Kong Skull Island. Hold on one quick second. Okay. Pro number one is the cast. I love this movie's cast. With the exception of one, it's a nitpick, but I might get into it a little bit later. But I love all the characters in this movie. They're all very well written. They're well acted. They're well cast. They all have extremely good chemistry. The camaraderie between all these Vietnam era soldiers is pitch fucking perfect. All of these guys feel like they have been through hell and back through the Vietnam War, which Vietnam pretty much was hell. Um, Maybe not reminiscent of Aliens, but it is amongst that similar kind of vibe where you can tell that these guys have spent a shit ton of time together. They know each other very well, and they all have their ticks and quirks that makes them individuals. None of the characters, in my opinion, are boring or bland. Um, yeah, the chemistry is great. The camaraderie is great. The kindred spirit is great. Watching these guys just poke fun at each other and jab at each other and talk shit, it's hilarious, but it's also a lot of fun, and you just get wrapped up in this camaraderie, and you yourself feel like you're one of the troop. To go through the individual characters, Tom Hiddleston as James Conrad. He's very likable. He's obviously a very skilled, very uh, excuse me. Um Tom Hiddleston described his character as a man who holds no political allegiance in a conflict, but he understands conflict. And he's also a former soldier who has been formed by an understanding of war, but his own skill set is something that's attached to the power of nature. And he thinks that's something people haven't seen in a long time. He's absolutely right. He is a big badass former military official, but he took those skills and morphed himself into something that, yeah, has no allegiance to anything other than nature. He understands war. He doesn't necessarily support it, but he does use the tools of the trade to carve out his living and save his own ass and save other people that he cares about. He's also very easy to get along with. It's kind of obvious that he might have a little bit of an ego, but I think that's just due to him being a very experienced guy. He comes off like he's been through some shit in life, but not in a damaged way that um, makes him very grizzled. But he is very stern and he's very uh, balls to the wall, no nonsense badass. He takes his job seriously, but he also does have very good people skills. Like he has a little bit of a sense of humor to him. Um, he's not stern, well, he is stern, but he's not an asshole. But he knows when to be firm and when to be a little more soft. He's also not stupid because he acknowledges that sure, Kong is a 110-foot tall giant ape, but he's not a bad guy. He was just defending his territory when he attacked the humans, as he says in the movie. I love Conrad. He is one of my absolute favorite monster movie protagonists. Um, and Tom Hiddleston does a great job playing him. Then we have Samuel Jackson as Preston Packard. Jackson compares his character to Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. Yep, that is 100% spot on. From the very get-go, you can tell that Packard is he's a very bitter man, kind of. He's a very professional soldier. He's a very skilled soldier. He's proud of his country and his heritage, but he has this stubborn pride about him, which a lot of military officials, like high ranking military officials, surely must have felt back in 1973 when troops were withdrawn from Vietnam. Vietnam was one of the biggest shit shows of a war that the American country had ever seen. Probably still has seen to this day. Um, to my knowledge, it's the only war that America has ever lost. And in my opinion, it's a war that we never ever should have gone to whatsoever. It was a gigantic waste of time, resources, human lives, and millions and millions and millions of dollars. It just was not worth sticking our nose into. Excuse me. Um, and yeah, a lot of people in the military were very bitter about how Vietnam turned out. There's a scene at the beginning when Packard looks at a box filled with all the medals that he's accumulated over the war, and he looks at him and just goes, all this for what? Nothing, essentially. Silver Star, Purple Heart, Purple Cluster, Gold Star. There's tons of medals that he's accumulated being in the military, and they were all earned for pretty much nothing. And at first, he is very happy to do one last mission, uh, even if it has nothing to do with the war. Um, and at first, you do sympathize with Packard watching Kong slaughter half of his men. Um, but over the course of the movie, he definitely does evolve into being this movie's human villain. I would say he's more like an anti-villain. He's not killing Kong to be just like the guy from King Kong Lives. He's just an asshole for the sake of being an asshole. You do understand why he wants to kill Kong out of both professional pride and also losing all of his men to Kong's hand. But by the end of the movie, you don't really support his desire to kill Kong. And while some can say that it's kind of frustrating watching Packard just go through the movie and not listen to reason whatsoever, I get it. It almost does irritate me a couple times. But in the end, it does lead to a very over the top Samuel Jackson death. Die, you mother. Boom! So, and Samuel Jackson, of course, does a really, really good job. He's definitely good at playing villains, and his character is very Captain Ahab esque, especially when he lights Kong on fire with napalm. He's got like this mean as my father-in-law called it, his motherfucker face. He's got like this mean, manic, wild look in his eye as he sets Kong on fire. Um, so yeah, Samuel Jackson does great. Probably, honestly, one of his best roles. He's had a lot of them over the years, but yeah, definitely one of his best. Oh, let's see. Then we have Brie Larson. This will probably be the only movie that I will ever review with Brie Larson in it. An anti war photographer and investigative photojournalist. Larson stated her character has her own sort of motive for joining the expedition. It's a group of, and that's the interesting thing about this movie. It's a group of misfits that are all coming from different angles looking at the same thing. You get to see how many different views in regards to nature and how we should handle it are dealt from many different perspectives. Larson further added that Weaver has an interest and respect for nature, and through that she has a closer, more loving and intimate relationship with Kong. I am definitely going to say Brie Larson is hands down my favorite King Kong girl. Um, Even though what she has is not a typical Kong relationship. It's not like Naomi Watts from Kong '05 or Jessica Lange in Kong '76, where they grow very attached. I would more say that Weaver, she has a great respect and admiration for Kong. And sure, there's a little bit of an emotional connection there, especially when Kong saves her life from being eaten by the Skull Devil. Um, they don't shove the relationship down your throat, and it's also not the main focus of the film, which I found to be very refreshing. Yes, like she says, she has a close, loving relationship with Kong, but it's a lot more subtle. But it is still cute and sweet to watch. Also, Mason Weaver is uh the only Kong girl, in my opinion, to be really proactive in this film. She's not a military official. She doesn't really have any combat training whatsoever, but she has been in the thick of war for quite a long time. She's done a lot of field missions and has been in and out of war for a very long time. So she does know how to take care of herself, and she knows how to be proactive and helpful to the guys. Sure, she's just there to take photos, but she doesn't get in anybody's way. She's not a damsel in distress, and when push does come to shove, she knows how to throw her hand in and give something to help. So that's great. Hands down the best King Kong girl. And then the last uh character to talk about of the human characters that is John C. Riley as Hank Marlowe. Fucking A, is he funny. Um he's kind of a guy who's out of time. Like uh he's been on this island that's been isolated from the rest of the world for who the hell knows how long, and he himself has been isolated from the rest of the world, stuck in 1944 for almost 29 years. um and while he's obviously from a different era of war, when he does interact with all these Vietnam soldiers, you do still feel that camaraderie. Like, yeah, I'm from a different time, but a soldier is a soldier is a soldier. We can still put our heads together and help each other out in a dire situation. But the main thing that I love about Marlowe, fucking A, is he funny. Some of the funniest lines from this movie are from Marlowe. Actually, most of the funniest lines are from Marlowe. One of my favorites, you look better than a hot dog and a beer on Wrigley Field on opening day. But you're real, right? um, and that's the other thing. Obviously, because Marlowe has been trapped on this island for almost 29 years, he's a little loopy. There's a couple screws loose in his head. He's just a little wacky in this in this movie. But um he doesn't turn into a raging lunatic. He does know when push comes to shove how to be a helpful soldier and proactive against fighting monsters. Hell, even though he pulls out a katana, he's the one who draws first blood in fighting against the skullcrawler in the Kong graveyard. Um and for the rest of the movie, he's like preaching to people, "Hey, you guys may outrank me, but I've been here a whole hell of a lot longer than you guys have. I know how this island ticks. We need to do this, this, and this, not that, that, and that." Um, he's probably one of the smartest characters in the whole movie. And I like that some of the characters acknowledge that Marlowe is probably right. When Packard is trying to go through the Kong graveyard to get to Chapman, and Marlowe is like saying, No, guys, no, that's a bad idea. East is best, West is worst," as he says. Um, what Weaver says to everybody, "Hey, guys, I think we should listen to Marlowe." And then when they reach the Kong graveyard, um, Marlowe says, "This is what's left of Kong's parents." Then Weaver says, "I've taken enough photos of mass graves to recognize one when I see it." That's one of my favorite lines in the movie. And also, Conrad acknowledges, maybe not out loud, but he definitely does take advice to heart from Marlowe throughout the movie. So both Weaver and Conrad definitely do pick up on Marlowe's knowledge of the island. And all three of them definitely share a collective brain when it comes to operating on the island and leaving Kong the fuck alone. Um, But the real highlight of John C. Riley is that he's just really fucking funny. So many funny lines. His body language, his facial expressions, just his appearance. John C. Riley with a gigantic Santa Claus looking bushy beard. He just exudes hilarious. And he's a little kooky in the head, but he still has his head screwed on properly, and he's just great. I love Marlowe in this movie. Ants, big ones. There's one now. Sounds like a bird, but it's a fucking ant. Overall, the cast is phenomenal. Um, yeah, love them. Damn. Pro number two is the tone for this movie. This movie strikes an even better balance than Rampage of being campy and entertaining, as well as dark and serious. There's a lot of moments where it goes from being campy to dark, but it doesn't feel jarring. There's moments that are really funny and really action packed, and then there's other moments that are dark, fucked up, and gruesome. But they go together like peanut butter and jelly, in my opinion. And I love it. Not as violent as Kong '05, but I'd probably say this is the second most violent Kong film. Not much to say. I just love the tone. Pro number three is the humor. There are so many funny lines in this movie. It's not even funny. I'll just go through some. There's an obvious Jurassic Park reference with Samuel Jackson. He's like, "Remember, hold on to your butts." Obvious Jurassic Park reference. When Kong first makes himself known to the helicopters, I think it's Chapman who looks at him and goes, "The monkey." um, when all the guys are collecting themselves after they just got their asses kicked by Kong, one guy named Cole cracks open a can of stew and starts eating. And another guy goes, "Cole, are you eating? What the hell are you doing? How can you be hungry right now? We just got our asses kicked by a monkey the size of a building. How can you even think about food?" And then Cole goes, "Yeah, yeah, it was an unconventional encounter." Cole himself, too, he's another one of the funniest characters. There's not something right with his head, obviously. Even though he's a good soldier, you just look at him, you're just like, what the fuck happened to you when you were younger? Because he thinks the story of the mouse and the lion involves the mouse killing a lion with a thorn, when even the actual story is about uh, a mouse saving a lion by taking a thorn out of its paw and saving the lion. And then the same guy goes, "Who the hell told you that version?" "My mother." That actually explains a lot. Of course, all the funny lines from Marlowe, the hot dog line, and then the no, that thing did. The Ewies won't say their name. I call them skull crawlers. Why? Because it sounds neat. I've never said that name out loud before. I'm just trying to scare you. I don't know if I'm gonna recognize the guy under this beard. Am I talking right now? You're talking. I'm talking right now. I'm gonna cut you with this knife by the end of the. This movie's funny. It's not gut bustingly funny by any means, but there are some moments where you'll get a really good laugh. Um, again, this movie knows it takes itself seriously, but at the same time, it knows when to be campy, and I love it. It's a perfect mix of being serious and light. Pro number 4 is the 70s aesthetic. I love the look of this movie. Even though it looks very 1970s, it doesn't look that way in a way that dates itself. Well, I know that the director drew a lot of inspiration from Apocalypse Now. I've never seen Apocalypse Now, but I do recognize that the way this movie looks, um, it's very deep rooted in the early 1970s in Vietnam War era. It screams the 1970s, but in a good way. They recreate the 70s extremely well. It looks like 1973. Um, and I love it. And anyone who's a fan of 70s cinema will get a good kick out of this movie because of how well it recreates the 1970s. Not much to say about that, but yeah, I love the 70s aesthetic. And it does work very well as a prequel to the Monsterverse. I don't really think there's no. That's kind of the fault of Godzilla 2014. So I can't really say that. It's kind of complicated, but I'd say for the most part, the uh the timeline and continuity is pretty well established with this movie, and I don't really think there's anything that conflicts with the rest of the MonsterVerse, in my opinion, at least. I know it's Wikizilla has gone into all those different weird timeline issues, which I'll probably explain more as I go along, but yeah, it's kind of complicated. Still, for the most part, this movie does it well. Pro number 5 is the music slash soundtrack. The music for this movie was done by Henry Jackman. He's an English composer. He did music for films such as Kong Skull Island, X-Men First Class, Winnie the Pooh, Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph Breaks the Internet, Puss in Boots, Monsters vs. Aliens, Kick-Ass and Kick-Ass 2, Detective Pikachu, and Strange World. So he definitely has some talent, and he's got some uh He's got some credit to his name. Um, hmm, I've seen a lot of his movies too. Yeah. So he's got some credit and I love it. Now the music isn't overwhelmingly great, but it's fitting for the film. It has a tribal jungle island feel to it, which is nice. It also has that 70s Vietnam War era touch to it, so that's good at least. But the main thing I love about this movie is all the songs that are chosen. Um, let's see. Oh, here we are. Music. Let's see. Hold on. We have oh, here we are. Songs such as "Time Has Come Today," "White Rabbit," "Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress," "Down on the Street," "Bad Moon Rising," "Ziggy Stardust," and "Run Through the Jungle," to name a few. They're all great. That's another thing that helps this movie feel very 1970s in a good way. These are all songs taken from the 70s. They were all popular songs taken from the 70s, and they all fit just perfectly fine. It lends itself to feeling fun and campy and energetic and action packed when the movie is trying to be. Like my favorite is the song that plays when all the helicopters drop the seismic charges. I think that was I can't remember what the hell's the name of that song. I think that was Time Has Come Today. Um I think so. Oh, that was a 60s song. Okay. So I could be wrong, but still, um that's my favorite hands down. Oh, it's my neighbor. Okay. Hang on, guys. I'm trying to stifle a sneeze. Yeah, not much to say, but I just love the music. Pro number six is the cinematography in this movie is fucking phenomenal. This might be the best cinematography of the whole MonsterVerse. More so than King of the Monsters. I haven't rewatched King of the Monsters recently, so I could be wrong, but how this movie is shot is so beautiful. There's lots of wide open shots. There's lots of wide like shots that show off a whole bunch of shit. It helps in making Skull Island feel a lot larger and a lot more expansive than it is. There's great use of low angle shots, high angle shots, drone shots from far away showing two giant monsters in one shot. There's great use of slow mo. Um, Yeah, all the cinematography and camera work in this movie is fucking phenomenal. This movie is very, very well shot. It's just literally just fun to watch how this movie is shot. Oh god, no. I don't want my nose to start acting up right now. Pro number 7, this movie is very, very colorful. There there's lots of kind of browns and yellows and greens. But there's also a lot of oranges because there's a lot of fire in this film. Um, but there are some moments where there's a fair bit of like the cooler colors, like blue and green and some purple. But when this movie is showing a lot of colors, it's very vibrant and fun to watch. This movie also does not have a darkness problem that Godzilla 2014 is infamous for. There are some scenes that are somewhat dark, but not so much to the point where you can barely see what's happening on screen. But also, it's just a dark, quiet scene. One of my favorites, of course, is when Weaver and Conrad meet Kong face to face. That's a somewhat dark scene, but you can still see everything that's happening. But when the movie takes place at night, the fires and explosions are very vibrant and they light up the rest of the screen in a very pleasant way to look at. Um, oh, another one of my favorite shots. This movie likes to silhouette Kong a lot. Two of my favorites, of course, is during the napalm attack when there's a big plume of fire, and then in front of it there is standing Kong looking pissed. But the most iconic shot of the whole movie, of course, is right when Kong attacks the helicopters. You see Kong standing in front of the setting sun, and all the choppers are slowly flying towards him, and Kong is just illuminated by silhouette by the sun. It's fucking amazing. It is right out of Apocalypse Now. It's a shot that looks very similar to something out of Apocalypse Now with red skies and a deep yellow orange sun. It's great. Pro number 7 is Skull Island itself slash the rest of the monsters. King Kong '05 has my favorite version of Skull Island. I think that has it's the most believable and it has the my favorite array of giant monsters, but this one is a very close second. I was going to say that it is kind of a nitpick that we don't see very many monsters in this movie, but thankfully Skull Island: The Birth of Kong does rectify that quite a bit, but we still do see a fairly large chunk of monsters in this movie to make this movie feel somewhat reminiscent of Kong '05, but still different enough to be its own thing. Like we see a bunch of different varieties of like pterosaur like birds. Um we see what are called stern buffalo, which are like giant um bison or buffalo on fucking steroids. Um, we see giant spiders, and for the most part, that's it. The comic expands more, but it's hard not to talk about this movie without talking about the other two monsters. But I'll get to those in a little bit. But yeah, Skull Island is awesome in this movie. And even though this movie was shot in Vietnam and a little bit of Hawaii, which I think it's fitting because this takes place during the Vietnam War, I think it's pretty fitting that it actually was shot in Vietnam. It still doesn't look like Vietnam, or at least not like you might think. Because this movie is drawing a lot of influence from Apocalypse Now, it does have that Vietnam War jungle warfare aesthetic to it, but it still does look like an alien world, like with King Kong '05. Not quite as much, but enough to feel like, yeah, this is a new world. This is a completely different environment that the humans are used to being in, and it's great. Excuse me. Uh oh. Okay, good. Okay, cool. Thought I turned my Wi-Fi off. Pro number 9 is the skull crawlers. I fucking love these little bastards. So Jordan Vogt Roberts, for the design process, did not want Kong's foe to be just another T-Rex, which I agree with. Even though it would have been kind of cool, at this point the T-Rex would have gotten stale. Plus, we had the V-Rexes from Kong '05, and you can't really top those, in my opinion. So Roberts decided to go in a completely different direction. It took him a while to figure out exactly what he wanted to do, but drawing inspiration from a Pokemon, No Face from Spirited Away, the first Angel from Neon Genesis Evangelion, and the one spider pit monster that was still seen in Kong 33, uh, Jordan Vogt Roberts came up with the skull crawlers, two-legged serpentine reptilian monsters that are fucking awesome. At first, I wasn't really a fan of these things before I saw the film, but when it was revealed what Kong was going to be fighting, I was like, two-legged snakes? That's kind of stupid. And even though these are very simple monsters, at least in design, um, how they're showcased in this film, I think, is spectacular. These are probably the nastiest monsters that Kong has ever fought in all Kong films. Um, Again, they're very simple. They're just giant carnivorous monsters. Um, they're actually labeled as hypervores in the lore of the MonsterVerse. They're labeled as hypervores due to having an extremely quick metabolism. So they exist in a constant state of starvation. And that's why they're so vicious and aggressive. And they literally just eat anything they see. Um, they make for a very good, worthy opponent to Kong because of how nasty and vicious these bastards are. It's fucking awesome. But they themselves are, in my opinion, really awesome monsters. This movie does a good job of showcasing even the most kind of basic monsters can still be significant threats if you do enough good stuff with them. And in my opinion, they do just right with what they're given for the skull crawlers. They're awesome. Pro number 10 is Kong himself. I love this version of Kong, specifically Kong in this movie. Kong and Godzilla versus Kong is great too, but I kind of can't help but feel like that's almost a different version. Even though it's the same character, Kong feels a lot more different in that film. But I'll get to that whenever I get around to Godzilla versus Kong. But this movie has my favorite iteration of King Kong. This I think no. Kong in this movie is the third largest incarnation of Kong, standing at 31 meters in height. And what's crazy is that Kong is still a teenager in this movie, or at least he's considered a teenager in this movie. Let's see. Oh, he's 32 meters. Okay, so Terry Notary and Toby Kebbell played Kong due to or through motion capture performance. A 104, 32-meter tall gorilla who is the last of his kind and is worshipped as the king and god on Skull Island by the Iwi natives. Notary stated that this Kong is an adolescent, and he tried to play Kong like a 14-year-old that's trapped in the life of an adult, saying it took 3 days to film the motion capture scenes. He stated, I gave some facial reference, certain subtleties. Toby Kebbell, actually, excuse me, said this. I gave some facial reference, certain subtleties, certain looks. Tara and I worked on stuff together and created what Kong needed. I was just there as backup for pieces that Terry really wanted to get details on. Um, and both of these guys do a great job playing Kong. This has to do with the special effects, but just as a badass giant monster, Kong is a sight to behold in this movie. Um, Different than Kong '05, thankfully. This Kong, in my opinion, is a lot more human, but still balancing being animalistic and ape-like while having a lot more touches of being much more human-like. Kong is still very much a ground and pound brawler and puncher. He's a very aggressive, very animalistic, badass brawler. But I love how they added these human touches to Kong. They introduced that Kong is very much like a tool user, which I think is fucking spectacular. Kong is very good at using impromptu weapons at his disposal. Like Kong is pretty fond of ripping out trees and either using them as javelins or like stripping them bare and using them as makeshift clubs. He's also fond of using, well, not fond, but another thing that he does, he when he's thrown into a ship graveyard, he gets tangled up by chains, but one on his arm is stuck around a boat propeller. So then he rips it off, wraps it around his hand, and throws it at the big skull crawler as a makeshift flail and harpoon. And then he uses the propeller itself as a bludgeon and a blade. Um, Kong is very good at thinking on his feet when he fights monsters. And I'm a big fan of characters who think on their feet. Kong is very good at this, and he's so fucking fun to watch. Oh, excuse me. I need to get another cushion. Ugh. That'll do. I think I better blow my nose real quick. Hold on. That's better. Okay, I'm back. However, this movie also does show that's better. The gentler side of Kong. Two of my favorite scenes um with Kong, they're both at night. Uh Kong is sitting on a cliff and he's just looking up at the sky, looking at the aurora borealis in the sky. And you see Kong not mean, aggressive, or sad, but you just see him sitting there just looking up at the sky. And you can read all the emotions that are going through his face. Um, and another one of my favorite scenes, of course, is when Kong meets Conrad and Weaver. At first, he shows up looking kind of mean and very stern, but when Weaver puts her hand on his face, you see his eyes, they soften. And you see his shoulders lower a little bit. You see his eyes soften, you see his face relax and not look so mean. And it's like an unspoken respect that he has for these two. And when he saves Weaver when she gets knocked off a cliff, he picks her up in his hand, and you see the look of concern and worry on his face as he picks up Weaver in his hand. Not in a romantic or obsessive way, but it's just purely out of concern. He doesn't want to hurt those that he cares about, and he just wants to look out for those that showed him some kindness. And when he puts her down and walks away, he turns around and looks at Conrad and Weaver. You can see this look of, it's a little bit of sadness, but it's also just kind of resolve. Like, here, I saved you. Now we're even. Go live your life. I may as well just talk about this. So to wrap up, Kong is awesome in this movie. He's a great sight to behold as a badass giant monster, and he's a wonderful sight to behold when he's being more calm and loving and adorable, honestly. Not quite as adorable as Joe from Mighty Joe 98, but he has a couple moments. But this will lead into pro number 11 is the special effects in this movie are outstanding. Again, it's a shame that this movie didn't win any Academy Awards for best special effects because this might be my favorite Kong film with my favorite special effects of all Kong films. Godzilla vs. Kong comes very, very close. So I might have to eat my words, but there's really no practical effects in this movie, at least not that I know of. It's all CGI and motion capture, but it's all outstanding. It's very detailed, very well animated, very intricately well done. Um, Very pleasant to watch, very fun to watch, And overall, the effects are just outstanding. I love the attention to detail in the monsters. Like with the skull crawlers, you can see like their muscles and sinew and veins popping all over their body. And you can see that the skin on their back is translucent. So you can see their spine and rib cage through the skin on their backs. And with Kong, you can see every little tuft, curl, knot, and tangle in all of his fur. You can see the muscles in his face make expressions and move and twitch. You can see his muscles and veins in his arms and torso. Um, and the CG, fun fact, the CG model for Kong in this movie had a whopping 18 million hairs on his entire body. Shit you not. And I do like the attention to detail toward the end of the film after Kong has been set on fire and he's been through some hell. You can see burns and cuts and scrapes and flesh peeling on his hands and his face. Like Kong has suffered some damage at this point in the movie, but he still keeps on going. But the effects are great. Absolutely fantastic. Some of the best CGI and motion capture work for a giant monster movie I've ever seen. It's awesome. And my final pro for Kong Skull Island is the action scenes and the monster fights. There's technically kind of four, but two monster fights are a bit short. But the rest of the action scenes, like the soldiers versus the Great Daddy Longlegs, I think it's called Giant Spider, that's really cool. Well shot, lots of good slow mo, lots of goopy monster carnage. When Kong fights all the helicopters, it is a gigantic sight to behold, and it's so fucking entertaining and awesome. Um, Kong fights a giant squid. That one's really short. You can tell that was a little bit of a reference to Kong fighting the giant octopus in King Kong versus Godzilla. So that's appreciated. But that's cool. Kong kills it just by stepping on its head and squishing it, and then proceeds to tear off all its tentacles and start eating them. So that's cool. Um, which that's another little scene that I want to talk about, the attention to detail when Kong scoops out a handful of water to take a sip from. Because he's so big, water pouring out of his hands is literally a fucking waterfall, a monsoon waterfall. Still, that's great. That's a fun little scene. Hold on. Hold up. Okay, so then there's the Napalm Lake scene, which is kind of short, but still very well shot, very colorful and fun to watch. And again, leads to a very over the top Samuel Jackson death. But the highlight of the whole movie, my favorite scene in the whole movie, is Kong versus the big one, the Skull Devil. This is hands down one of my favorite monster fights of the entire kaiju genre. It is so well shot, very well animated. It's decently long too. I think it's about 15 minutes long. There's lots of stages to it. There's lots of shit done with it. It's not just 15 minutes of Kong punching the shit out of the skull crawler and the skull crawler just tackling him and lashing him with his tail or biting him. There's a lot of shit that's done. And Kong tries his damnedest to kill this fucker. He smashes a boulder into its face, uses the boat propeller to harpoon it, uses a chain to throw it all over the place and strangle it, uses the propeller to stab it in the shoulder and then cut its neck open. Um uh what else does he do? And how he kills the big one is also fucking awesome. In the novelization of Kong Skull Island, how he kills the big one's a little different. He throws a punch so far into the skull crawler's guts that he crushes its innards on the inside. That doesn't really make sense to me, but okay. I prefer what they do in the movie. Kong has Weaver in his fist, and the Skull Devil tries to attack him again. He grabs it by its neck, and it wraps its tail around him, and then he wraps his tongue around his fist. He's trying to pull his arm out, but then he shoves his hand into the skull crawler's throat and then gives one mighty heave, rips out his fist along with the skull devil's tongue and its innards along with it. And he rips it out with this giant burst of bile and fluids. And it's fucking badass. The first time I saw this, my jaw dropped. I did not expect it to be so violent, so visceral. It is so fucking cool. Again, one of my favorite monster fights of the entire kaiju genre. It is badass as fuck. And this movie had sold me a long time ago, but I thought, aside from that, the most badass moment was when Kong rips out a tree and turns into a baseball bat. He charges towards the big one and then swings for the fucking fences, shatters this tree branch over the Skull Devil's face in slow-mo, and it's fucking awesome. Whew, damn. I love this monster fight. It is absolutely amazing. So, with all these great things to say about Kong Skull Island, do I have any cons? I have two very minor nitpicks. One, I think it's 10 minutes too short, maybe just because I would have liked to see a couple more monsters, maybe Kong fight a couple more monsters throughout the island, or just a couple more skull crawlers. I think that would have been cool. Um, and two, the character of Slivko. I kind of can't stand this guy because he's the worst kind of dude. He's the guy that says all the wrong shit at the wrong time. Mainly, I just think he's kind of annoying too. But the main thing that drives me nuts when Marlowe was talking about uh like he has a wife, he's like, I got a wife, had a wife, have a wife. Guess I'm not so sure. We got hitched right before I deployed. Right before I was shot down, I got a telegram saying she just gave birth to our baby boy. I got a son out there who I've never met. And then Slivko just says, oh yeah, she totally thinks you're dead. Conrad just goes, hey. Oh man, that I'm just like, fuck you, dude. Why would you say that? You're such a fucking little sniveling bastard. I will say that he kind of does win my favor because he eventually he and Packard are standing off with the rest of the people about whether or not to kill Kong, but he's really the only one who kind of listens to reason. Then he goes, "Put it down, sir," to Packard. So that kind of wins my favor over for Slivko, but I kind of just can't stand this dude. Find him to be very mouthy, very obnoxious, and very annoying. But outside of those, nope, I got nothing. I have absolutely zero cons with this movie. So my final thoughts, Kong Skull Island is a fucking masterpiece. More so than Kong '05, this is one of my favorite movies of all time, and easily is one of my favorite monster movies of all time. Hands down, too, still is my favorite King Kong film. I adore the ever living shit out of this movie. So I will be giving this A perfect solid gold 10 out of 10. I highly, highly recommend this movie. It may just be an entertaining monster movie, but you know what? That's what I want. When I watch a monster movie, I want it to be entertaining as this. And there's very few that get even better than this. Kong Skull Island is a very special film. So, thank you all to those who have watched March of the Apes. This was a lot of fun to do. And you know what? Since I technically have reviewed the first installment of the Monsterverse, how about I continue down this road? Post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. Look forward to the next review. And as always, remember, if you see a giant ape, don't be Captain Obvious and ask, is that a monkey? And I will see you guys in the next video.